Hello, my Psych Juniors, and welcome back. Today we are continuing on with the cognitive approach, and we are learning about cognition in the digital world. This is the first day of this lesson. There'll probably be 2 days of this. So it's definitely going to be the entirety of this week. So go ahead, set up your notes for cognition in the digital world, day one. And then I want you to reflect and jot down a few ideas of how do you think technology impacts memory? Why do you think that? And do you have any personal examples? So go ahead and pause and reflect on that for a minute and then meet me back here. Awesome. So please log on to office hours Monday and Thursday from 12 to 12:30 to share what you learned and to talk about your answers to these questions. Also, this is the day one lesson for this week. But I do want to make sure that y'all know your day two lesson is going to be sort of a debate prep. And the debate, I can't require it. But if we could all get that done before Thursday at noon, then we could do a virtual debate at noon on Thursday, which would be really, really cool and have us all have something to look forward to. So maybe try and front load your psych work for the week so that we can do that debate on Thursday. It would be pretty cool. Okay, cool. But let's jump into today's lesson. Okay. So, your guiding question for today, how does technology impact memory? You're going to be testing on this on your IB test next year. And why does this matter in life? Do you think technology has changed your brain? Do you think your brains are different than mine? Or maybe are your brains different than your parents or your grandparents? It's possible, and we're going to talk about that today. And then I found this comic, and I thought it's just very accurate for today. Do you mind if I strap your phone to my forehead so I can pretend you're looking at me when I talk? If your friends ever say something like this to you, or you ever feel like this with your friends, then maybe we need to reevaluate that screen time. Okay. So, how might technology impact memory? In 2008, which was a while ago, in 2008, Nicholas Carr wrote an article for The Atlantic, and it was front page, and it was called "Is Google Making Us Stupid?" And this is Google making us stupid? Get it? That was funny. But this was a huge deal at the time. And basically now, if we think about it, I mean, think about this whole experiment, basically worldwide experiment in online school. Computers have become a significant part of our daily lives even before this coronavirus outbreak. So think about how central computers and technology are to your daily life. That's not what the world was like even for my parents when they were my age. My mom told me the story about her first cell phone that she got when she was in her 20s, and it was the size of like a briefcase, and it barely worked. To now, we barely even use these to make phone calls. Like, how often do I actually make a phone call on my cell phone? Not that much. So this idea that technology has become so central to our life is we have to do research to see if it's changed the way that we think. And there's lots of anecdotal evidence from people on both sides of this debate basically saying technology helps them and makes them better at remembering things or better at doing their schoolwork. And then there's people on the other side of the debate that say it's hindered them. But my goal in this is to give you some real evidence on both sides of this, and then you also are going to do some of your own research for that debate and really form your own opinion about this question. So, is Google making us stupid? Let's find out. So, this first idea is a different type of memory. Is there a different type of memory? So far, we have talked and learned about short-term memory, long-term memory, procedural memory, semantic memory, and episodic memory. However, Wegner et al. In 1985 suggested that there was another form of memory that might exist between groups of closely linked individuals, and he called this transactive memory systems. Long name, and you're like, how can memory exist between groups of people? But as soon as I give you an example, you'll be like, oh, that is in my daily life. This idea is that a transactive memory system is going to include more than just the sum of the total memory stored by the group, but it also includes information about who knows what and how to access that info. So here's a really clear example that should help. Let's say, for example, dad never remembers birthdays because dad knows mom will always remember them. Or, and this was me in high school, or I was always the friend that got asked. Friend one doesn't remember the homework because she knows friend two will always remember it. So it's this idea that people kind of save space in their brain based on their relationships. So I'm sure you can think of an example in your life right now. Maybe you always remember or do something for your sibling, and they never have to remember how to do it, because you're always the one who does it. So that's a transactive memory system. Okay, so I want you to take a minute. You can pause the video, you can write if you want, but I think it's important to reflect on what are some examples of things that you rely on, maybe your parents for remembering, or maybe you rely on your siblings for remembering things, or your friends. And then, although this idea of transactive memory can be a really positive way to manage your life, it can save space in your brain. I want you to think about do you think maybe this could be detrimental if you maybe like always study with the same friends for psychology exams? Or is it possible that this is detrimental to your relationships at times? And what could be some drawbacks on reliance on this type of memory? So these are just some reflection questions. You can pause and think about it. This is the kind of stuff I'd love to hear your thoughts on during office hours. Okay, hopefully you're back. So, transactive memory and technology. What does that mean? So, frequent use of internet search engines and databases might represent a new type of memory, transactive memory system that reduces our reliance on our own individual memory. This is kind of what this whole idea of technology and cognition is based on, is if it's almost like the idea that these search engines have become not a person that we have a relationship with, but it's become a new transactive memory store. If I know that I don't need to remember how old Zac Efron is, I can just pick up my phone, or I know how to access that information. Where I pick up my phone, I go to Google and I Google in how old is Zac Efron, then that piece of knowledge never has to go into my long-term memory because I know how to access that knowledge. So Sparrow et al. 2011, which is one of the studies we're going to learn about, she wondered if the internet has become a huge transactive memory store, if it's like this enormous transactive memory store that people now use. And in her model, individuals would no longer need to remember the actual information. They would just need to remember how to search for it effectively using something like Google. So let's jump into what Sparrow's research was. So her aim was to study whether or not the internet acts as a transactive memory store. Her method, she asked participants to type 40 trivia facts into the computer, and some facts represented new knowledge. So for an example, an ostrich's eye is bigger than its brain, while other facts were more likely to already be known. So like the Twin Towers fell on 9/11 due to a terrorist attack. So some was new, some was stuff that people would generally already know. And this experiment used a 2x2 design, which means that there were two independent variables that she manipulated. The first was that half of the participants were told that the computer would save everything that they typed for later reference, and the other half were told that the info would be erased. And then within those groups, half of them were asked explicitly to try to remember the information. The other half were not asked explicitly to try to remember it. So this picture at the bottom shows you the four conditions that a participant could be in. So some participants were in the group that were told the computer would save the information and that they should remember it. Some were in the group that said that the computer is going to erase the information and that they should remember it. Some were in the group that were told that the computer would save the information. They were not explicitly asked to remember it. They weren't told don't remember it. It just wasn't mentioned. And then another possibility was that they were put in the group of the information is erased, and they were not explicitly asked to remember it. And then the sample was a University of Pennsylvania-based participant pool, mainly students at Wharton Business School, which is a really famous business school at University of Pennsylvania. So students were likely older than 20, older than 22, 23, and also very definitely part of this weird population. Not sure about the whiteness aspect. It was in 2011, so hopefully she recruited diverse participants, but definitely educated, industrial, um, oh my gosh, I forgot the R. Hold on. Educated, industrial, rich, and democratic. Definitely the eared part, maybe not the weird part. Okay, so what did she find? She found that when participants were explicitly asked to remember the information versus it wasn't mentioned, there was no significant difference in the participants' ability to recall the trivia facts, but there was a significant difference if the participant believed that the information would be stored on the computer. So participants who believed that they would be able to retrieve the info from the computer later appear to have made far less effort to remember the information versus those that knew that they would not be able to use the computer. And hopefully this result, like I feel like for y'all, like intuitively makes sense. If a teacher tells you you'll be able to look this up, you don't really have any motivation to move it into long-term memory because you know exactly where you can look it up. And here we can see the raw results. This is the percentage of the trivia facts that were called, and I think this n equals 46 means there were 46 facts. So when the computer will save the info and they were asked to remember, people remembered 19% of the facts versus when the computer saved the info and they were not asked to remember, they remembered 22% of the facts. So we can see it's a lot lower in this case when the computer will save the info. On the other hand, when they were told the computer will erase the information and they were asked to remember, they remembered 29%, so 10% more, versus when they were not explicitly asked to remember, but the computer will erase it, 31% of the facts were memorized. So there's this very significant increase in memorization of information when they know that the computer won't be at their disposal later. Some strengths: this is a really strong experimental method. It's a well-designed experiment. Some limitations: there are more than this, but the one that I came up with is it's not really possible to measure the level of effort that a person put into memorizing the information in the study. So that can be a little bit of a limitation there. Okay, Sparrow also did a follow-up study, and I'll link so you guys can see it. I'll link the study where you can see exactly what she did for the follow-up, but I didn't want to give you a whole nother one because I have another study I want you to see. But if you're interested in it, then you can go look at it. But she did a follow-up to measure how well people recall where info can be found compared to the information itself. And the data that she found showed that participants were much more likely to remember where info can be found. So for an example, they would remember the name of the folder on the computer where that information was rather than the information itself. So her research overall really does suggest that the internet is increasingly occupying an important role in human memory and changing the way that we remember things. And another study, which I'm going to show you next, by Storm et al. In 2016, suggests that our confidence in the internet also leads to us trying less and trying to remember things less because we are so confident that we can use the internet. So if we look at Storm et al. In 2016, Storm wanted to test the idea that successful use of Google to retrieve information made it more likely that participants would rely on Google in the future rather than recalling info from their individual memory store. This is a super interesting method. So basically, participants were randomly assigned to one of three conditions. The first being the internet condition, the second being the memory condition, and the third being the baseline. So participants are randomly assigned. And then there are two phases of the experiment. In the first phase, the participants that are in the internet condition are told to use Google to answer 8 difficult general knowledge questions. On the other hand, participants in the memory condition are asked the same 8 general knowledge questions that are considered difficult, but they must use their own memory. And then lastly, participants in the baseline were not asked any questions in the first phase. Then in the second phase, all participants were asked to answer the 8 easy general in the second phase, all participants are asked to answer a new set of 8 general knowledge questions, but in this case, they're much easier questions. Questions that most people should just know without having to use Google. And they're asked to answer these 8 questions as fast as possible. In this case, though, all participants in all 3 conditions were given access to Google, but were not told explicitly to use it. So the dependent variable is what proportion of questions did the participants choose to use Google in that second phase. The sample is 60 undergraduate volunteers, so these are college students between the ages of about 18 to 22, also likely a weird population. So findings, the results showed that using internet in the first phase made participants significantly more likely to use internet in the second phase, meaning these participants were not trusting themselves. They were choosing to use the internet to make sure that they were right about these pretty general knowledge, easy questions. So the conclusion is that internet search engines suggests that using internet search engines to retrieve info makes us more likely to do so, and thus less likely to use our own memory in future information recall tasks. And then if we look at these findings, when people were in the internet condition, 83% used Google for the second phase. When they're in the memory condition, only 63% used Google, but it was still a majority of people used Google. And then the baseline was 65%. So the memory and baseline are pretty close together. Some strengths, it's another really strongly designed experiment. Some limitations that I came up with, relying on trivia information, I think you have to question whether or not this is ecologically valid. Why should someone exert effort to remember trivia when they know they can just look it up in today's society? So it's a little bit difficult to test that. And I'm sorry, that should say Storm et al. 2016. It says it correctly here. I will make sure it's Storm et al. 2016. Storm, not Sparrow. Okay, so your first activity for today, and your only activity for today, is you're going to watch some cool videos. There's 3, but they're all really interesting. So I want you to watch the 3 videos that I linked on Google Classroom. They're all about this idea of the Google effect and how Google might be impacting our memory, not just Google, but technology in general. And then after watching those videos, I want you to complete the Google form that asks questions about both the videos and Sparrow's research. It's only 2, or well, it's 1 question and then another. It's 2 questions and one has multiple parts. But it's going to ask about the videos and Sparrow's research that I just went through with you. So go and do that. And then other than that, that's all I have for you today. So watch those videos and do that Google form, and log on to office hours on Monday and Thursday from 12 to, I have to make sure the time's right. Yeah, 12 to 12:30 to share what you learned and have any questions. And as a reminder, Thursday's lesson is more of a debate style. So if you do that before noon on Thursday, that would be awesome, because then we could have a virtual debate. So looking forward to seeing y'all at office hours. Have a great day.